This is America, the land of the free. Parents are being held hostage. They did not sign up to co-parent with the government. We want a divorce.
Kellogg and other food companies will argue children prefer this over this, just as they would prefer cocaine over sugar. That doesn't make it okay.
I would truly recommend firing almost every single nutrition advisor in the U.S. government and replacing it with very simple guidelines.
Over the course of my 30-year career, I have lost just as many, if not more, than I have saved. I have watched them slip through my fingers. Mothers that orphaned their children, husbands that widowed their wives. I have even watched parents forced to suffer the unthinkable loss of their adult children. There are not words to express the sadness I have felt and the fury, knowing that they were literally sacrificed at the altar of unchecked corporate greed.
You know, before we start off, I have to give a shout out to Senator Ron Johnson for actually hosting this kind of debate. But this is all about America's health and nutrition and getting a second opinion now from the 80s and the 70s and the 90s, where we've had some crazy laws and regulations passed. Now that we're in 2020, we're able to look back and see what damage has been done to our kids, to my fellow friends, to my parents and fellow grandparents. These rules and regulations have wrecked our freaking nation.
The entirety, almost, of my generation, along with the 2 generations that followed, have fallen victim to America's unchecked obesity crisis and over 170 comorbidities that go along with it. I don't know about you, but I've watched my friends jabbing themselves every day with fertility drugs, praying for a pregnancy, my friends getting up at the crack of dawn to get radiated where the lump was found in their breast, my friends swallowing fistfuls of pills to manage their debilitating anxiety and depression. The decades between 1980 and now didn't beget a genetic quantum leap in which our DNA inexplicably mutated to make American bodies expand and fall ill at an unprecedented pace. And while Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z have our problems, 75% of us are not stupid, weak, or lazy. So hopefully you are wondering what has happened to us. And we're here to tell you. In the late 70s and the early 80s, a sinister series of events converged to change food and subsequently health in America indefinitely. A plague that crept like a fog while we slept, literally and figuratively, blindly trusting that the powers that be would never betray us. I mean, it seemed unthinkable to question whether a corporation would poison us for profit. I mean, the widespread assumption, at least when I was a kid, was that they were acting on our behalf. They wanted to make food, more affordable and more convenient. But it was this betrayal of trust that allowed them to insidiously infiltrate every part of our lives. Home-cooked meals became fast food value meals. Libraries and bookstores with no food or drink policies installed cafes selling 500-calorie coffee drinks and pastries. Eggs became heart disease cholesterol bombs, and Honey Nut Cheerios got labeled heart healthy. The default human condition in the 21st century is obese by design. Specific, traceable forms of what's referred to as structural violence are created by the catastrophic quartet of big farming, big food, big pharma, and big insurance. They systematically corrupt every institution of trust, which has led to the global spread of obesity and disease. Dysfunctional and destructive agricultural legislation like the Farm Bill, which favors high-yield, genetically engineered crops like corn and soy, leading to the proliferation of empty calories, saturated with all of these toxins that we've been talking about today for 3 hours, and it seems like we can never say enough about it. And then this glut of cheap calories provides a boon to the food industry giants. They just turn it into a bounty of ultra-processed, factory-assembled foods and beverages strategically engineered to undermine your society and foster your dependence like nicotine and cocaine. So we literally cannot eat just one. And to ensure that you don't, added measures are taken to inundate our physical surroundings. We're literally flooded with food, and we are brainwashed by ubiquitous cues to eat, whether it's the Taco Bell advertisement on the side of a bus as you drive to work or the vending machine at your kid's school. There is no place we spend time that's left untouched. They're omnipresent. Kids with mega celebrities eating McDonald's and loving it. Sponsored dietitians paid to promote junk food on social media, utilizing anti-diet body positivity messaging like derail the shame, in relation to fast food consumption. Time magazine brazenly issuing a defense of ultra-processed foods on their cover with the title, "What if ultra-processed foods aren't as bad as you think?" And when people like us try to sound the alarm, they ensure that we are swiftly labeled as anti-science, fat shamers, and even racists. They launch aggressive lobbying efforts to influence you, our politicians, to shape policy, secure federal grants, tax credits, subsidy dollars, which proliferates their product and heavily pads their bottom line. They have created a perfect storm in which pharmaceuticals that cost hundreds, if not thousands per month, like Ozempic, that are linked to stomach paralysis, pancreatitis, and thyroid cancer, can actually surge. This reinforces a growing dependence on medical interventions to manage weight in a society where systemic change in food production and consumption is desperately needed and also very possible. These monster corporations have mastered the art of distorting the research, influencing the policy, buying the narrative, engineering the environment, and manipulating consumer behavior. So given all of this, the question becomes, how did I escape? I mean, I still remember the lunches my mom would pack me as a little kid. And, I mean, it was such innocence and love, and she had no idea that my kindergarten lunchbox contained at least 50, now I'm thinking it's far more, carcinogens, solvents, emulsifiers, colorings, preservatives. I have the list. I'm gonna skip it because we did it already. Frankenfoods like juice boxes with no juice. Processed lunch meat held together by meat glue. I mean, as a tween, I would sit on the couch after school, just numbingly inhaling Cheetos and Oreos in front of the TV. There was no such thing as mealtimes. And I could stuff myself endlessly and never feel full. Buckets of KFC at night for our family dinner because it was quick, convenient, affordable. And I remember I would lay in bed comatose. It was a lifestyle equivalent to a death sentence, but we never questioned it because we were just a family that was simply attuned to the culture. So it should come as no surprise that by that tender age of 13, I was obese, failing in school, and becoming increasingly depressed and despondent. And my mom began to feel helpless. She spoke to my pediatrician and a child psychiatrist, both of whom suggested she medicate me on Prozac and Ritalin, but she was watching many of her friends' kids on this exact same protocol, and they weren't improving. My mom was becoming progressively desperate to help me, and then fate intervened. She met another mom whose child had been thriving since joining a local martial arts studio, and she signed me up the next day. And my sensei was smart enough to recognize the ways in which America's youth were being routinely poisoned, and he cared enough to create an environment where myself and the other students under his wing were educated, insulated, and nourished to become our best selves. I went on to get my black belt and become a trainer and a nutritionist myself with the intention of waking up the others and giving them the same tools that he gave me. And while I have been fortunate enough to pull many back from the edge, over the course of my 30-year career, I have lost just as many, if not more, than I've saved. I have watched them slip through my fingers. Mothers that orphaned their children, husbands that widowed their wives. I have even watched parents forced to suffer the unthinkable loss of their adult children. There are not words to express the sadness I have felt and the fury, knowing that they were literally sacrificed at the altar of unchecked corporate greed.
As somebody who loved The Biggest Freaking Loser, I love seeing Jillian Michaels on the stand because not only does she know it, she's practiced it, she's preached it, but just what you have to see next. I don't know if you know this, but if Kellogg's or some of these cereal brands sell their cereals in America, it's not the same ones that they sell overseas. And just make sure you watch this next clip all the way to the end because it, in fact, probably will blow your mind.
They have replaced natural ingredients with chemicals. They have commodified animals into industrial widgets, and they treat our God-given planet as an inexhaustible, abusable resource. Sick Americans are learning the hard way that food and agriculture should not be scaled in the same ways as iPhones. After watching this go on for too long and spending a lot of time with Vani, earlier this year, I filed a shareholder activist letter against Kellogg for selling a less safe, inferior version of their cereals to American families. As Vani pointed out, very few Americans know that Kellogg sells a safer, cleaner version of their cereals in Europe than the ones they sell here. They use more chemicals in the US version because it is more profitable and because we allow them to. The absurd question we should all be asking today is why shouldn't American children receive the safest version of products that Kellogg already makes? To highlight the perverse incentives, Senator, Kellogg declined to meet with us and effectively told us that American children prefer the brighter colors. And they will continue selling the more toxic versions as long as it's, quote, compliant with applicable, relevant laws, which is why I'm here today. We need your help to stop this behavior. Because of our lax regulations and public company incentives to prioritize profits over safety, millions of Americans are constantly subjected to uncontrolled trials of chemicals that are banned or regulated all over the world. While there may be many difficult issues discussed today, this one is easy because healthier countries are already showing us how it can be done. By adopting the same chemical regulatory approach of healthier developed nations, we can take a significant and absolutely necessary step in both providing safer food and lowering healthcare costs for all Americans. We can reverse this great American poisoning, and we already have a playbook on how to do it. Thank you.
So a question for both of you combined. You've done the research into these different chemicals, and you talked about dyes and make it more colorful, so more attractive to children. What are the other attributes? I mean, what else do they gain out of this? You know, better preservatives? I mean, what you know what I'm saying? I mean, we can say...
Artificial food dyes are cheaper, and they are brighter. And the reason that I chose to use artificial food dyes in my public activist letter is because there's basically no counter-argument. Many of the things discussed today, I think there is a nuanced debate. But with artificial food dyes, they have shown all over the world that they can use colorants that come from fruit.
This is the Canadian version.
This is the brightness of the Canadian version, just for visibility. And this is the brightness of artificial food dyes. So, of course, Kellogg and other food companies will argue children prefer this over this, just as they would prefer cocaine over sugar. That doesn't make it okay.
But I think...
Now, I'm not going to say I think cocaine is better for you than sugar, but I definitely think sugar is worse for you than cocaine. But we're going to slow this down because the next clip of the second opinion of America's health and nutrition comes from RFK and this other doctor, I believe Dr. Palmer. They talk about the weight of the brain and how apparently 0.5 or 5% of it is made of microplastics. Just listen to this.
Dr. Palmer, the mitochondrial disorder affects every organ of the body, and the brain is an organ of the body. And but the brain actually has a lot more difficult job of excreting these kind of toxins than the other organs. Can you talk about that, and also talk about the fact that about 0.5% in recent studies of the American brains are now made up of microplastics. So 0.5% of the weight of our brains are now microplastics, and that's something we should all be worried about.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. The issue of microplastics and nanoplastics in the human body is actually, sadly, in its infancy. We have 2 publications out in the last couple of months demonstrating that microplastics are in fact found in the human brain. And as Dr. Amin said, and you cited, 0.5% of the body weight, or the brain's weight appears to be composed of microplastics. We need more research to better understand whether these microplastics are in fact associated with harmful conditions, because microplastics are now ubiquitous. So some will argue, well, they're everywhere and everybody's got them and it's just a benign thing. Some will argue that. The most compelling evidence against that is a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine a few months ago now, in which they were doing routine carotid endarterectomies, taking plaque out of people's carotid arteries, just routinely doing that for clinical care. And then they analyzed those plaques for microplastics. 58% of the people had detectable microplastics in the plaques. So they compared this 58% group who had microplastics to the ones who didn't, followed them for 3 years, just 3 years. And the ones who had microplastics had 4 times the mortality. There is strong reason to believe, based on animal data and based on cell biology data, that microplastics are in fact toxic to the human body, to mitochondrial function, to hormone dysregulation, and all sorts of things. There are lots of reasons to believe that. But the scientists will say we need more research, we need to better understand whether these microplastics really are associated with higher rates of disease. I think people are terrified of the answer. People are terrified of the answer. And if you think about everything that you consume and how much of it is not wrapped in plastic, all of those industries are going to oppose research. They are going to oppose research funding to figure this out ASAP. Because that will be a monumental change to not just the food industry, but our entire economy. Imagining just cleaning up the oceans and trying to get this plastic, and then more importantly, trying to figure out how are we going to detox humans? How are we going to deplasticize human beings? How are we going to get these things out? It is an enormous problem, but the reality is putting our heads in the sand is not going to help. And I am really hopeful that by raising issues and letting people know about this health crisis, that maybe we will get answers quickly.
So there's a couple things I want to address here with what Dr. Palmer said. One, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Two, it's kind of crazy that 0.05% of the brain is made up of microplastics, supposedly with these 2 recent publications. That means about 0.015 pounds of your brain is made up of microplastics. If you're a Snoop Dogg enthusiast like me, to give you some perspective, that is 2.4 ounces of the devil's lettuce that can be found in our noggin of microplastics in terms of weight, just to give you like a weight comparison. Insane. But what's even more insane, and I think kind of based, is what this next guy calls for, which is basically the old school Trump of, you're fired.
You're fired. Get out of here. You're fired.
An ultra-processed food is generally a food that you couldn't possibly replicate in your own kitchen if you tried.
I've also heard just comments like, don't drink your sugar, eat what your grandparents ate. You're pretty solid ground from that standpoint. So,
Senator, I just wanted to quickly mention, working for the food companies, in the past 2 years, there's been 50,000 nutrition studies created. And I can tell you, nutrition research is ultra-processed food marketing documentation. There's not a big lobby for the broccoli or regenerative beef. And I think we've been divorced from our common sense of these questions. We are the only animals that have chronic rates of obesity and metabolic dysfunction. We're born with an innate sense with whole food of what to eat. You can't overeat broccoli or steak. And I think the key thing with these, I think the industry wants us to get into a debate about which ingredient's good, which ingredient's bad. These science experiments are designed to hijack our evolutionary biology. And I think we could replace all nutrition guidance with, a deprioritization of ultra-processed food and be in a much, much better place. I would truly recommend firing almost every single nutrition advisor in the U.S. government and replacing it with very simple guidelines.
That is nice to hear accountability at least be called for. Now, RFK dropped some solid advice. It's the same advice that I used to give to all my clients back when I was personal training, which is when you go to the grocery store, you never shop down the aisles. That's where you're going to find foods that are packaged, they're ultra processed, the stuff that you want to stay away from. The real food, the stuff grown from the earth itself, is going to be around the perimeter of the grocery store. You've probably heard that if you've been in the gym for a little while, you're trying to look like, like some good tips to lose weight. That is a solid tip. When you go to the grocery store, just search the perimeter.
What I've always said and what I've done myself over probably the past decade is to just not eat anything that comes in a package. And would you say that was good advice?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And in an ideal world, we'd be able to adhere to that ideal. I think it's important to understand how to read a nutrition label and to gain a sense of health literacy today. I think many people are still shocked at the connection between what they eat and their health outcomes. But as a general proxy, yeah, I think it's best to shop around the perimeter of the supermarket. Most people don't realize this, but supermarkets are designed the same way. It's the aisles that contain all the ultra-processed foods typically. It's not to say that there's not good stuff in those aisles, extra virgin olive oil, nut seeds, things like that. But the more you can keep your shopping cart tethered to the perimeter of the supermarket, the better off you'll be.
Okay, stay with me because we're really turning the page. We're shifting gears on this because I need you to take the mindset of you going around the perimeter of a grocery store instead of down the aisles now. Now, I want you to imagine you're a new parent, right? You have a newborn and you want what's best for your little son, your little daughter, whoever they may be. You want the absolute best for them. And if you're trying to follow the recommended medication schedule from until, newborn 18 years old, they're going to have like 70 different V's, you know what I'm saying? They're gonna have 70 different one of those, and that's not an exaggeration, man.
In 1985, newborn millennials had to follow a schedule of just a handful of vaccines. Today, a child following the recommended vaccine schedule will receive up to 70 shots by the time they turn 18, including 27 before he or she turns 2, and as many as 6 shots in a single visit. Are all these shots producing healthier kids? According to the data, no. Are we allowed to even ask? Also, no. Some parents who've asked too many questions about the recommended vaccine schedule can find themselves reported to Child Protection Services. Or they will get kicked out of their pediatrician's office for not being compliant. This is America, the land of the free. Parents are being held hostage. They did not sign up to co-parent with the government. We want a divorce.
Truly, shout out to Miss Clark there. She got a standing ovation in the room, and honestly to God, she deserves it. And it blows me away because growing up, me trying to think back to middle school and high school, it seemed like the Democratic Party was the one for the people wanting better Americans, smarter Americans to go to school and get a job and the degree and do more for their family. And it felt like the Republicans were these warmongering people who wanted to go out and just wage war against the world and walk loudly and carry a big stick. And why does it just feel so back-asswards now? But please let me know what you guys think about all of this down below. When I first saw this, I don't know why I got so emotional. Maybe it's my background in health and fitness, and I lost a little over 100 pounds, and I was privileged for a little over a decade to help hundreds of other people lose hundreds of pounds as well. And now I still keep working out every day. I'm part of a local gym, local CrossFit gym, technically a strength and fitness gym. Not CrossFit affiliated technically, but we're doing the workouts. And I just think more people who have anxiety, who have depression, which I will say I have both of those. And my cure for them, my way of medicating myself is to get my daily dose of fitness in, right? Instead of taking Ritalin and all these SSRIs to help with depression and all of this. Instead, I take ownership into my own hands and realize some anxiety is kind of good because that means like I have a little bit of passion, ambition of what I'm trying to do, but I don't want to derail myself and get too much on a rant because that's a whole different YouTube video for a different day. But if you like the words that are coming out of my mouth, please like and subscribe. I basically upload every day, just reacting to the stuff I see on Twitter. Recently, it's been uber political, and I promise it won't always be political, but some of this stuff means something to me, and I'm here to share it.